We're live. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining me for another important edition of Talk with Tasha. I am Natasha Harper-Madison, proud City Council representative of District 1 in East and Northeast Austin. Today is the first day of July, which means we are in that period that City Hall watchers have historically and mistakenly called the July vacation. It's true that this time of year is when City Council has an extended break between voting sessions. Our last one was on June 11th, and the next one isn't scheduled until July 30th. But as I learned during my first July on the job last year, just because we're not meeting and voting does not mean we are not hard at work. That's even more true this year. As a community, we're facing way too many challenges to let our foot off the gas, even for 1 second. Tonight, we'll be talking about those challenges, both the COVID-19 pandemic and the historic demand to reshape our approach to public safety and racial justice in the city of Austin. I'll be joined by my esteemed colleague from District 6, Councilmember Flannigan. Then we'll gain insight about police reform from several women who are experts in the field because they happen to work in the field. Finally, we'll learn about Central Health's response to the pandemic from the officials at the Travis County Hospital District dedicated to serving our uninsured and our underinsured residents. Before we start, as usual, I want to remind you about www.austintexas.gov/COVID-19. That's the city's website where you can find the latest resources. And I mean the latest, they add to it daily, the latest resources and information about the pandemic, including very up-to-date stats, as well as details about free testing. Again, one more time, that's www.austintexas.gov/COVID-19. Well, we've got a lot to cover tonight, so let's just jump right in with our first guest. Hailing from District 6 in Northwest Austin, he's loquacious, he's pugnacious, and he's got a laugh that fills up any room he enters. Jovial, my friend, my colleague, Jimmy Flannigan. Hey, Jimmy.
Hello, Natasha. Hello, Councilmember. It is so good to see you, and so glad to be on your show.
I'm so glad you could make it. I wish I was wherever you are with that beautiful sunset. But
Well, I love my district, and you are pretty familiar with District 6 too. And there are basically two iconic photos of District 6. You have behind me, which is Lake Travis, and the only other possible iconic photo would be traffic on 183. So I choose this one to represent my district.
Well, so and the funny thing about traffic on 183, you got the northbound phenomenon, and then the southbound, in the evening, and then the southbound phenomenon in the morning. I've never seen anything like it. So for those of you who didn't know, I used to live in Northwest Austin, and man, I'd never seen anything like it. But my hope is that during the course of our conversation, that's one thing we'll touch on, if not today, eventually, just sort of thinking through, it's not just north or southbound 183. District 6 includes much of Northwest Austin, including part of town that is Williamson County. And, I sort of wonder, aside from, the obvious things like traffic and transit, I sort of wonder if there are conversations happening about racial justice. What are you hearing from your constituents about, what's happening in our country presently?
The conversation across the county line is often very different. And I live in Williamson County myself. I'm the first resident of Williamson County to serve on the Austin City Council. So I spend a lot of time listening to my Williamson County constituents. And on the Travis County side, it is often the part of the county that isn't represented in the kind of traditional city hall politics. It's this far outer edge of town, but it's also the part of town with the largest Asian community, and so there are a lot of nuances to the conversation about racial equity in my district. Also interesting is when you start to look north up into Williamson County, the active conversation about Confederate statues that still stand in some of our surrounding municipalities, especially at the courthouse in Georgetown. These are active debates, and I will say, in the last 6 years. So I first ran for council in 2014, and I lost in a very close runoff. 2 years later, came back and kicked some butt. The conversation has definitely changed. People are opening their eyes to a bigger conversation. They're starting to see the lived experience of folks different from them, and kind of critically, my part of town is increasingly representing the suburbanization of poverty. So as folks are being pushed out of the core part of the city and they're moving farther and farther out, they're moving to Pflugerville, but they're also moving to my part of Austin and then up into Cedar Park and Leander. So there's always a changing demographic that represents more than just what you might consider as a ex-urban or suburban perspective.
I really appreciate that perspective. I think a lot of us sort of forget about, Northwest Austin in that way. And so thank you for bringing that up. So, one of the things I wanted to talk to you about along those lines, we're talking about reversing, you're talking about the evolution of your constituents, the evolution of mindsets. So, at the core, we're talking about reversing racism, but we know that American bigotry didn't start and stop at, or doesn't rather start and stop at somebody's skin color. The LGBTQIA plus community continues to face its fair share of discrimination. And, given that you're family, I'd like to know, how do you see these discussions intersecting either personally or professionally?
Well, in addition to being the first Williamson County resident to be on city council, I'm the first openly gay man to serve on the Austin City Council. So a combination that no one would have ever predicted in the past. But here we are. And before I was a council member, I spent many years in small business advocacy at the LGBT Chamber of Commerce. So I've kind of moved through these worlds in very unexpected ways. And I find that the LGBT community, kind of the vast majority, sees this as all of our fights together. I used to kind of liken it to the last helicopter out of Vietnam. Like, we just getting everybody in. Everybody's rights are getting on with this one, and no civil rights fight is going to be left behind on my watch as a member of the LGBT community. And I think, what we're seeing with the recent Supreme Court decisions on employment non-discrimination is that in some cases, LGBT rights are coming faster, while we're still standing here fighting for the basic human dignity of the Black community, especially, but people of color writ large. There's also a part of the LGBT community, it should be noted, certainly white folks who are LGBT, that don't quite see it that way. That they see that they get their white privilege, and they see their challenges as an LGBT person as a distinct fight. And it's a small part of the community, but it's one that we can't ignore. You cannot assume that because someone is LGBT that they are going to immediately get it when it comes to these larger fights.
I really appreciate that. And the nuance is really important during the course of these conversations where we're talking about radical change. We really have to get to the root of, having the most difficult conversations and recognizing that, some of them are more complex than others. The major issue we're dealing with right now, of course, is COVID-19. So in District 1, we happen to be dealing with the majority population of Black and brown residents who are absolutely disproportionately affected by COVID-19, as well as simultaneously significant lack of access to healthcare via clinics, as well as insurance. So I wonder what particular challenges, especially as you noted earlier, the suburbanization of poverty. What challenges are your residents dealing with in District 6?
Yeah, the challenges are there, but they're far more hidden. There's a segment of my district that face similar challenges. We've got a couple of Title I elementary schools. There are a couple of pockets of, probably fair to say, extremely affordable apartments in my district, but they are often in that place where it is very far away from the nearest service. So you have folks who have moved out into mostly on the Williamson County side of my district. But being on the Wilco side means that you don't get access to some of the services that are being provided by Travis County.
Right.
And although you do get access to the services provided by the city of Austin, those services are not geographically proximate to you.
Right.
So you have this very strange, like, living in a privileged area with like brand new infrastructure. So my district was all built in the last 30 years, basically. So there's lots of sidewalks and there's lots of safe. There's not a lot of flooding problems. Like, all that stuff is true. But if you are in a place where you're working a low wage job, you're working a minimum wage job, because we still have those in every part of town. How do you get access to what clinics do exist for that community? Do you have to drive up into Georgetown? Do you drive into East Austin where some of those services exist? It's a difficult spot for folks.
I can imagine. And I think that's something that's important for us to discuss, for folks to recognize. We see the difficulty, we see the challenges, and we're trying our best to mitigate them. But sometimes, it really feels impossible to them. So I think maybe it helps them to understand that sometimes it feels impossible to us too. We keep plugging away, obviously, and fighting the good fight. But, it really is a source of frustration, some of those inconsistencies with care. So moving on to money. Speaking of inconsistencies, let's talk money. So next month, we'll be getting our first look at next year's budget. In your time on council, have you ever been more excited to get your hands on our municipal spending plan?
It is a wild time. This will be my fourth budget, right? I'm in my fourth year. In the three budgets that I have participated in, they've all been very different. They've been very different as a process matter, primarily. The last three budgets were done in areas in times of very strong economic growth. So there was always a little bit of like extra sales tax revenue that hadn't been budgeted for. And so you got to kind of imagine bigger ideas, but it was still pretty constrained. And frankly, I voted no on two of the three budgets I was a part of. Because I didn't like the process that had been used or the details that had been laid out, or I didn't feel super confident in the fiscal responsibility or restraint that had been used. And in part is the reflection of my district. But this year, this is a whole other ballgame. And to have this opportunity to have a deeper look into almost the sacred cows of city budgets. It is really a unique opportunity, and I hope every city in America is using this time to really go back and explore, is every dollar being spent the right way?
Yeah.
And in a very specific way as it relates to policing, but not just policing. You stand up these programs and these systems, and they have a dollar figure attached to them. And then once you have those systems, there's a lot of pressure to use them for all the things, even if the thing you're using it for didn't need it.
Right.
Everyone's got an anecdote where there was a car wreck and they sent 10 fire trucks and 50 police cars. And it's always a big giant exaggeration. But there are some cases where we send more resource to a problem than is necessary, in part because we have the resources.
Right.
What would it look like to more target and design programs to the needs of the community? How might you do that in a way that provides better service at a lower cost?
Yeah.
And is better for our first responders as well. Why are we asking police officers to have 50 jobs? Why are we asking firefighters to have 50 jobs? Why are we asking EMS people to have 50 jobs? Why aren't we instead having the right service with the right trained staff for the right moment?
That's the most perfect segue. So you made some remarks recently outlining a potential vision for reimagining the leadership structure within our police department. Very briefly, can you give us a kind of a general idea of what that looks like, how do you see us moving forward on that? Just a little bit of information about that process.
Yeah, so the chief's role in Texas is very special, and it's unique compared to the chief's role in other states. The chief as a role has special powers defined in state law where the chief can override the council and the city manager. That's a tough job. And to not only not be elected, you're not even hired by the people who are elected. It's this weird disintermediation between you and the public. So it has put our chief in a very difficult spot where he has to balance things, but he doesn't have kind of the public consent in a way that an elected official would. So I looked at this in a different way, and I said, well, what if we looked at the way we converted the city from at-large to districts?
Mm-hmm.
Prior to 2014, the council was basically like 7 mayors, right? 7 people elected citywide. Now we're in districts. So what if we, instead of a chief, you had a council of commanders? And each of the 5 seats would represent the 5 regions in APD. So you basically have 5 geographically representative commanders. And as a body, they made the decisions that would ordinarily rest on the shoulders of one individual.
Mm-hmm.
And then you create a civilian role, which could be called police commissioner, or it could be called literally anything, but a civilian role that is dedicated to this group of 5 sworn leaders to be the interface between the council and the police and the kind of public safety regime. So this model would both help kind of democratize the decision making,
Mm-hmm.
but also enable us to have a sworn leadership that was as geographically and demographically diverse as the council.
I really, really appreciate that. And I look forward to digging into it. I think, especially, we have a public safety meeting tomorrow. And so I really look forward to digging into that more, and, just all of us sort of, taking a deep dive into the concept, because it makes so much sense to me. Jimmy, we're about to be done for the evening. I just wonder if there are any final thoughts you'd like to leave the people with?
Well, everyone tune in atxn.tv tomorrow to watch our Public Safety Committee meeting. It is going to be a workshop, so it's not going to be the council talking to itself like we normally do. We're going to have a panel of frontline officers and community experts to talk through the general orders and tactics part of policing. But it won't be the last. We're going to continue a series of Public Safety Committee workshops, putting officers and experts at the table to go through the work. It's not reality TV. It's not entertainment. It's not big grandstanding rhetoric. It's time to get to work. And so that work continues tomorrow. And if you want to follow any of the stuff that we're doing up in District 6, you can check out my website, atxd6.org.
Thank you for joining us, Jimmy. It's been an absolute pleasure. I look forward to having you on again.
Thanks, council member. And I am always honored to be in your presence and to follow your lead on so many issues important to District 1.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. You have a good night.
You too.
Thanks. All right, y'all. So that was really insightful. I can't wait to dig around in that idea some more. So we've been talking a lot about how to change our approach to public safety, not just here in Austin, but in cities across America. It's a part of a larger conversation about tackling racial injustice and the legacy of white supremacism in the United States. So on this show, we've heard from policymakers, we've heard from activists. Tonight, we're going to talk to 3 women who wear the badge themselves. For now, there are only 2 with us. But to be clear, they are not here in their professional capacity as Austin police officers. Instead, they're here to talk as fellow humans and residents of our diverse community. Joining us first, we have Officer Erica Danielle and Sergeant Tonya Jefferson. Hello. Hi, can you hear us okay, Tonya? I think you're muted.
Okay, yes, I can hear you, yes.
Excellent. Good to see y'all. How's it going today? You're not getting ate up by mosquitoes out there?
I'm sorry?
I said those mosquitoes aren't eating you up?
No, it's good out here.
Nice. So, I mean, anybody who's interested can take them. I'd like very much for this to be as much like a conversation with friends as possible. So I guess the first thing I'd ask is, what is, for you personally, what has this last month been like?
I guess I'll start. For me personally, it's been rough. I, it's been very hard. I have had to shift different things as to perspectives, how to look at things, how not to see things, and how things really are. And it's been difficult because you're on the front line, but yet you understand and feel what the protesters are feeling. And as I've said before, I just wanted to at some point step on the other side of that barricade to say, I feel you. I know where you're coming from, and I'm with you because I've been torn, and I understand. And so I've been torn, and it's very frustrating mentally, and it's draining. It really is.
I can imagine so. Erica, did you want to take that one, or you want me to keep it pushing?
First and foremost, thank you for the opportunity to have this candid conversation.
Absolutely.
I cannot have this conversation without first honoring the land that we're on, because people went through brutality during those times, and those that came before us. I honor also the spirits that left on behalf of police brutality, where something could have been done to preserve life should be the standard, right? I also honor the peacekeepers that know how to flow properly into being warriors on behalf of preserving the life of community members, young and old. So I want to make sure that I preface and give honor where it's due. But personally, the last month, nothing has really necessarily changed for me. What I've been actively feeling in the department has been this for several years. People that know me know that I've had these conversations prior. Absolutely nothing has changed other than something happened in another city, which created a worldwide uproar. When these very detailed moments have been happening in our own backyard for years. There's been questionable and horrible situations that have occurred here. Sandra Bland, Breon King, and countless others that should have created the marching of thousands prior. The last month hasn't done anything personally, but further confirms we tend to wait for something to happen outside of Austin to elicit a needed change, when we should be diligently, actively, and acting with a sense of emergency, which is basically keeping that same energy in this community.
I appreciate that very much. And I'd like for y'all both to feel this one. What can council do to make your job easier in your mind?
Well, in my opinion, we as officers, as African American officers, we have been walking this fight for a while. We have walked the fight silent. And we have decided to come out. And when some of us have decided to come out and come forward to express our thoughts and our feelings, it seems like everything has been falling on deaf ears. And we've asked and came to the council, even after the Newsom incident, came to the council open-handedly to say change needs to happen in this department. We were willing to want to sit down and discuss issues with our command staff or our fifth floor. No results. No one willing to want to be there to actually hear our side and hear what we're saying. And everything just falls on deaf ears. So we approached the council. We came to the council asking for help. We had lost faith in our leadership, had discussed numerous times our faith that was lost in the ability of our chief to be able to lead us and lead this department. Mm-hmm. And we were then told a resolution was put in place. With this resolution, we had hope. We had feelings that something's going to happen. There's change going to happen. So we were happy about the city council placing that and putting that in place. And if it wasn't going to happen, we weren't getting a cadet class. That was a very difficult thing to hear because, one, we knew we were short officers already. So to sit and agree with that was difficult because, on the one hand, we need the officers. But on the other hand, if things like that are put in place, that makes change, that helps with change. But it's obvious that that obviously was not the issue here and was not something that was presented to us in that way, was going to happen in that way, considering nothing ever happened. And COVID happened, there's no class, things of that nature, but there's no checks and balances. So the resolution to us just went on deaf ears. The city came in and hired this law firm, Ms. Tatum. She gave you a report, showed you in this report, basically to not slap the city in the face, but showed you we have problems here. Right. You have problems that you're not listening to. And it just comes to a time when we are trying to tell you, we're trying to let you know what the problems are, and you just don't want to listen. As our leader, you don't want to listen, and you don't want to hear us when we're begging to give you what the issues are and what needs to change.
I appreciate your candor, and I can definitely tell you that I share your frustration, especially, feeling like the only one sometimes. I mean, literally being the only one, but the feeling of being the only one. It does feel daunting, but you definitely have my commitment to keep fighting and pushing and have you feel like something actually happened. That's one of the things that keeps me up at night. Y'all feeling like nothing happened, like nobody did anything, even recognizing how hard I fight behind the scenes. You don't see that part, and you shouldn't see that part. You're not supposed to see that part. But, something tangible should happen as a result of all that fighting. But thank you. I really appreciate your candor. Erica, did you want to weigh in? Tonya kind of took care of that one.
Same.
Well, I do. I appreciate both of y'all's candor. I guess one of my next questions was going to be, what conversations are you having with your colleagues? But I think you already answered that question. There's something, I don't know if either of you were watching the broadcast just before you came on, but Councilmember Jimmy Flannigan was on, and he was talking about this idea he has, and that we're, an initiative that we're going to put forward. And we'll be talking about it during the public safety meeting tomorrow. But the idea is, as opposed to having a chief, who has this sort of unilateral power to overrule council, to overrule the city manager, to have a series of commanders. So the way the city council used to work was it was at large. It didn't matter what part of the town you lived in, but you could represent a certain council district. So then we shifted to what they call the 10-1 system. So every district has its own representative. And so the idea he has is for the 5 regional commands for PD that we have 5 commanders, and that commander represent their the area that falls within the parameters of their command. And under that, there would also be a civilian position, and the civilian position would be sort of the liaison between the commanders and the council. Just given that, you're just not hearing about this, I just sort of wonder if you have any thoughts about that kind of process.
Well, go ahead, Erica. I'll let you go first.
I do want to go back because I think it's really important to discuss the conversations that we may be having with colleagues. I want to address that because I know that that's important. I know a lot of people are asking questions, so I'm gonna give some time to that first, right?
Absolutely.
So simply put, I want to make this clear. It really isn't the Black body officer job to educate white bodies about racism. It is indeed their job to learn, research, be uncomfortable, and attempt to find space within and absorb various trains of thought. The few times that I've had these conversations with people, I assumed that they wanted to have these conversations because they wanted to hear my perspective. I'll admit that some officers did that, but then there were other officers that walked right into what I call a space of fragility. Fragility looks like bringing up Black on Black crime, suggesting you are stating facts, data, statistics, becoming defensive when I discuss my views. The reason this happens is because white body officers do not have the frame of reference of the Black body pain. Therefore, there's an attempt to minimalize it because it triggers them, right? Fragility occurs when a white body officer is not able to actively listen to a Black body officer without throwing in the faces of the officer's data and statistics, because you think that's the best option for the conversation. That is simply called fragility. So I've had pleasantly difficult conversations, and I've had conversations that are wrapped around fragility. I would say that it's about 50-50, right? So going back to what you're saying about doing something radical, I do want to applaud the fact that we are thinking outside of the box. When doing something like that, basically kind of taking away the executive branch, and now we just have a, kind of like a council for APD, right?
That's exactly what it would be. Mm-hmm.
It's a council for APD. I think that is radically beautiful. I also know that in order to do something like that, we have to then go down into the layers as to how those people get there.
Right.
You also have to remember that 65% of American policing is 65% is white, Christian, conservative males. So if we're talking about being radical and having this council of commanders, then the radical piece that could be a part of that is demanding or having specific seats for people of color. But saying that we're just going to have commanders when 65% of the commanders have the same thought, just different ways of peeling away the layers of those thoughts, right? Some are more progressive, some are more conservative, but they all have the same reference when it comes to their thought process. Is not necessarily radical. That's basically just reinventing the thing that you already have.
Right.
So there has to be a radical, these 3 seats or these 4 seats have to have a person of color in it. Point blank, period. So now you have, the thought of white body officers, but then you have the other perspective, right? Of Hispanics, Blacks, and if we can find other parties as well, and you have a collective train of thought where each person has to have checks and balances with the other.
Yeah.
Right. You can't. This commander can't just make a conversation. This situation, a commander has to then consult with 3 other commanders, and one of them have to be a person of color. That's radical change, right? Because now you are stating that this is what has to occur, and these particular thought processes and these individuals are the ones that have to be a part of the conversation throughout the entire process.
Let me ask you this. So given that, this is new, the concept is new, it really is just us conceptualizing at this point. How can we create something radical and effective and appropriate, frankly? And so I wonder if, because I'm obviously jotting down, your ideas. My staff is feverishly taking notes. But I wonder if, as the conversation continues, so we have our committee meeting tomorrow, but as the conversation continues, all those kinds of ideas, if y'all could help pump them into the idea. And so, we're not forming what we think you need. We're forming what has been informed by people in uniform telling us what they need. And so I would really love it if you could share more, just jot down or shoot us an email just as things are coming to you, we'll just sort of plug and play, this is the ideation phase. And so really getting it right is very important.
Well, another thing, Natasha, that I feel with that, any process you put in place can work as long as it's fair and impartial. Yeah. Now, right now, for example, I don't know how you plan on redistricting or placing the certain commanders over certain areas. Right now, we have a wide variety of African-American officers, for example, that work out of the East Sub. I don't know which district that is for certain right now, and I think it's yours.
It is.
Yes. So majority of your African-Americans are working out of that substation. Our North substation, for example, and I think that could be possibly where Mr. Flannigan is located, is majority white. And it's also bordering Williamson County. Now, like Erica stated, those makeups within this department are critical. Because for me, when I applied for a job as a supervisor, I went there and rode out and saw the culture, got a feel for what it was like. And I pulled my application. I drive further than 5 minutes from work now just to be happy out at the East substation. I do that for a reason, because I knew I was not happy at that substation. The culture is not there. I was not welcome. It was not a welcoming feeling. So I wanted to be happy. So when you decide how the makeup is of the people that are over these particular areas are going to be made up, do know that there comes also a culture that's going to come along with that. So without changing first your systemic issues in your agencies and your systemic problems, you're going to roll all the same things in, and it's going to be triple that now, because now you have civilians involved in it. You also have different people over different chiefs. Basically, it's not one that's making a decision. Now you have numerous chiefs having particular ways on how they're dealing with different things at different stations and different areas of command.
I appreciate that. Duly noted. And again, we're in the ideation phase. And so all the things that would work, all the things that wouldn't work, points of consideration, things that y'all would see that, would be a blind spot for us. I think all those things are very important. And I look forward to the conversation tomorrow. I don't know if either of you is able to dial into I'll make sure. Caleb, would you mind throwing in our private chat information about the committee meeting tomorrow? If you're able to attend, if you're able to chime in, I think it would be awesome. It's a workshop of sorts. So we're not just, talking heads tomorrow. Tomorrow, we're talking about what it looks like moving forward. How do we get some concrete resolution to the culture problems? How do we move forward, and retool and, sort of right size the budget, like all these things. And it should be a robust conversation, but diverse in terms of voices. So it would be great if either of you or both of you were able to join us. So I wanted to ask, I guess the question more or less is, what adjustments have y'all had to make, in the way, for us, the conversations are twofold, right? We're dealing with a pandemic and we're dealing with radically attempting to abolish racism, that's hundreds of years old. And, we're dealing with, that in the way of systems. The pandemic highlighted a lot of these systems, food insecurity, housing disparities, education disparities, transit disparities, digital divide. Once all our scholars went to having to do their academic, complete their academics online, now all of a sudden everybody recognizes that, certain families don't have access to computers or the internet, and so a lot of these problems were just highlighted by way of COVID-19, but these are deeply embedded, deeply rooted examples of inequity, right? So there's those things, but then there's the racism deeply embedded in the culture and the system of modern day policing. So for us as a council, we're dealing with both simultaneously. And I think in a lot of ways, especially as Black officers, y'all are too. And so I just sort of wonder, how has COVID-19 shifted your day-to-day operations, how you do your job?
Well, it has drastically affected, especially our community relations, where myself and Erica work. It's hindered a lot of communication that we can directly have with the community. And some of our community members, as you said, don't have computers. We can't do Zoom to reach them. A lot of them, we would like to reach out to more of them. It is hindered. And now that it's increasing the amount of people that are testing positive, since that has increased, we have now put in place more restrictions, on us mandatory wearing masks, things like that. It does hinder, our processes and the way we handle things in our office right now.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Mm-hmm.
I was gonna say, did we lose Erica? There you are. No, please.
I'm right here.
We see you.
So I wanted to highlight this because I think council, any data folks out there, please just be mindful of the words, right? That I'm about to say now. The pandemic actually, I think, really did something interesting in reference to how we do our jobs. Call load speaking. How we do it during the pandemic, where we're not going to lower priority calls. In fact, people need to just go online and do things, or do it over the phone with the 311 dispatcher. These things actually, in my opinion, this is solely my opinion, should be an ideal standard. Reason being, we've scaled back physical interactions. If you scale back physical interactions, you often scale back the use of force that comes with those physical interactions, right? The adjustment has exposed some hard truths, though. While taking patrol calls in East Austin, there were two main calls that I saw myself going to back and forth. That was mental health calls and people without homes, something that has something to do with people without homes, or a mixture of the two, right?
Yeah.
The pandemic showed me that this is the bulk in a lot of areas, not just this district, right? If there truly needs to be a conversation about defunding, I'm gonna say this with an asterisk. If there truly needs to be a conversation about defunding, my personal recommendation is a 24-hour mental health outreach team and a 24-hour homeless response team that can deal with those call loads from a resource-centered perspective. I am sure that most cops did not sign up to be mental health professionals. In fact, we don't have a lot of training in reference to it, not enough to maneuver in that in a beautiful way, right? Mm-hmm. The kinks and logistics can be worked out, but any funding should go towards the implementation of those type of teams. I think most people are fearful that the money will not be used in that way, right? There's a lot of, conversations around where, money gets pulled here, but then we see a euro go up. Money gets pulled here, and then there's a new bike lane in West Austin, right? And historically, it hasn't been radically towards Black and Brown communities, period. I have seen it. I have community members that have been here for 30 plus years that can attest to it. Yeah. And I can give you their numbers, right?
I don't need it.
Okay, because you know the same ones, right? Yeah. So, cops think that, the same thing under the guise of not fixing a problem that has frustrated many officers, as they have left receiving complaints from community members about wanting something done in reference to those two types of calls,
Right.
but then get their hands tied by the powers that be, which then leaves them in a very, very interesting position to not be able to do something when somebody is constantly calling them, right? Including me as a community engagement officer, right? There has to be a collective conversation, because disjointed ideas with personal biases attached has led to historical and current discord, especially in the Black and Brown community. And this pandemic has brought all of that out into the surface.
Absolutely. And to be clear, and I think just for the record, I literally have never said defund, because I don't think it's defunding. I think it's, a reallocation. I think it's right sizing. And everything you just said, I couldn't agree with more. And that, the resolutions, we passed 93, 94, 95, 96, which are all about policing and resources. And we did so unanimously. We don't do that as a council. And we did so unanimously because people are fed up. Y'all are fed up. The community's fed up. And frankly, as policymakers, we are too. Everybody's tired of talking, and we're ready to start doing. And we want to do in a way that makes sense. We can't ask y'all to do more than you were hired to do. And so I really appreciate you daylighting that from your perspective, because it's what we've been hollering, but we don't have your lived experience. So I'm looking at the time, and y'all made me talk too much. We got for a little bit, but this has been one of the best conversations to date. If for no other reason, I think y'all were answering questions that the general public has. And I think you're also speaking to other people in uniform, who I think sometimes feel like we're not thinking in the grand scheme of the equation, that they're not a part of it. And that's definitely not the case at all. So I will say this, I appreciated having y'all both on. Something tells me we're going to be talking a bunch in the future. Sergeant Tonya Jefferson, Officer Erica Danielle, thank you so much for sharing your time, your wisdom, your experience. We couldn't be more grateful. Thank you so much. I hope you both have a good night.
Yes, ma'am. And thank you.
Thank you. Woo! Look. And so, I think that was a really good segue as we talk about, pandemic, right? So the COVID-19 pandemic continues to rage on here in Texas. Today, state officials reported more than 8,000 new confirmed cases since yesterday, the highest one-day total yet. 57 Texans also died in that same time. 57. The second highest single day death toll since the coronavirus first appeared here in the winter. Meanwhile, Texas continues to lead the nation in the number of residents without health insurance. The safety net for those people here in Travis County is Central Health, a publicly financed hospital district for lower income residents. Central Health is one of our most important frontline organizations during this pandemic. And with us tonight to talk more about its operations and how it's pivoting during the spike are, we were originally supposed to have two, and I think we're down to one, which is great because she's a great one. Deputy Administrator Perla Cavazos, thank you for joining us.
Yes, and Ted Burton is also here with us. I don't know if you can see him.
I can now. And you did the introduction, but I'll do it too if you don't mind. And VP of Communications, we also have Ted Burton with us tonight. Thank you guys for joining us very much. We really appreciate it. I don't know if you were in the green room and got to hear some of the conversation. I feel like it was a really great segue as we're recognizing some of the complication, and so often the job that they're doing is, deeply rooted in folks without medical coverage and healthcare, and folks who are existing in the margins in a lot of ways. And so I think it'd be pretty important if you just take a moment to sort of talk to folks about what is Central Health doing in response to the recent surge in COVID-19 cases.
Yeah, I'll just I'll start a little bit and then kind of hand it off to Ted. But thank you so much for having us, council member. And it's just listening to the previous conversation was really impactful and important conversation that needs to be had. COVID-19 is also affecting our communities of color significantly. And, we'll talk a little bit about that. But Central Health is the Travis County Healthcare District created to provide access to healthcare for individuals who are low income and uninsured. As you said, we have our affiliate community care health centers that's, on the ground, providing direct care to individuals affected by the pandemic, testing and other healthcare services. I want to talk a little bit about, Central Health and community care. Just generally, we've been at the table with Austin Public Health and city and county leaders and other healthcare providers, the hospital systems, collaborating on the response to the pandemic, ensuring that it's coordinated and strategic. And, that's really what it takes. And we're glad to be at the table and serving the community in however we can as a healthcare provider and healthcare district. I want to also mention that we have, one of our keystone programs is the Medical Access Program and MAP Basic Program. And this is a local program provided by Central Health that covers medical care for qualifying residents. And so, if you're uninsured and if you're low income, if you've recently lost your job, we encourage folks to call 512-978-8130 or go to www.applyformap.net. You can submit an application online or over the phone, and we're ready to get people covered and the healthcare that they need.
Perla, would you mind, if I may interrupt just real quick, would you mind repeating that phone number and that?
Absolutely. And I can put it on the chat
later. Yeah.
Yeah. So that number to apply for our MAP program is 512-978-8130, or you can enroll online, and a majority of our applications are coming in online right now. Okay. And that's www.applyformap.net. And I'll put it in the chat box. And then, and a lot of what we've been doing is also outreach and engagement and just supporting community care and their efforts. And I'm going to hand it over to Ted to talk about that.
Thank you.
Oh, Ted, we can't hear you.
It doesn't look like he's muted, but I think he may be. Perla, while he figures that out, maybe Caleb, you could offer him a little assistance. While he figures that out, I'll ask you, what does testing capacity? Oh, is that there? You are.
I just switched to a different microphone. I apologize.
No worries.
Yeah, I wanted to say thanks again for having us here. And I'll tell you that this COVID-19 is no joke, as everybody here knows. And for me personally, today, a friend of mine, a African-American woman, a former colleague, was taken to the hospital with COVID-19. So she's in the ER tonight. And my friends and I, of course, are thinking about her and praying for her. But this is affecting everybody in our community. And I bet everybody on this show has been touched or affected. And one of the things that Central Health and Community Care have been really focused on when it comes to communications and engagement is trying to reach communities of color that have historically been marginalized and disenfranchised and are being disproportionately affected by coronavirus. And so you can look at the statistics yourself. There's a dashboard on the Community Care page and on Central Health's website that shows you the statistics for testing. Latinos are testing almost a third, or almost 33% of Latinos who test positive. African Americans, people with underlying health conditions, are, if they test positive, often face more serious consequences. So we have developed an initiative, which is Protect Yourself, Protect Your Family, that is geared specifically for people, for communities of color. We've done paid media, so that includes paid radio, digital or online, paid social media, print advertising. We're about to do another round of that. We are launching now a business outreach initiative. And so we've identified businesses that are either owned by African Americans, Latinos, or serve, that's their constituency or their customer base. And we're going to be delivering resource kits to them that will include flyers that can be distributed to customers and employees, posters that can be put in their storefront or windows or food truck or whatever the business might be, and masks, so safety, face coverings. So that's beginning. Hopefully we'll be on the streets next week. We are beginning to compile a list. And council member, you may have some suggestions for us as organizations and businesses that we should be reaching out to. So faith-based organizations, and then of course businesses in those zip codes that are seeing the highest positivity rate. So we'll be targeting those communities first. And so those are just some of the things that we're doing. And just along the line of what Perla was saying about MAP, we've been using community health workers to call MAP patients and have made more than these aren't robocalls, these are real people making phone calls, more than 3,000 calls. And we've actually had conversations with about 2,000 people. And so that's been a really effective way to reach people with key information about how they can protect themselves, where they can go for testing. And just as important as what do you do once you get tested? How can you isolate at home? What if you live with roommates or you live in a multi-generational family? How are you supposed to isolate alone and stay by yourself? Or what if you're caring for a parent or grandparent? And so we're talking to them about how they can do that safely, and then how they can access the city's isolation facilities, which I don't like that name because it sounds very scary to me, but how they can access a safe, clean place to go quarantine for 10 days if they need to do that, and they can't do that at home.
Thank you for all of that. And especially what you said last. Those are the things. I was having a conversation with somebody the other day about multi-generational households, or about households where, isolating within the home is just not possible. So I talked about ISOFAC, and they had never heard of it. And then some of the childcare resources that are available, never heard of it. And so I think part of the problem is we clearly are not effectively communicating enough to people what resources are in fact available. So I appreciate you bringing that up. And I'd love to offer our audience the opportunity to, within the comment section, in which case I'd encourage y'all to go back and kind of scroll through. Folks are going to be asking questions, and because we're just kind of tight on time, it's difficult to ask their questions here. But if you have the opportunity to go back afterwards and sort of breeze through some of the questions and you have an answer, feel free to do that. But I'm going to encourage our audience that's watching, feel free, like Ted said, businesses that are either owned by somebody in the Latinx community or African American community, or that's their customer base, folks who need this information most. And the priority is by way of disproportionality with the positive test and negativity and outcomes. And so if you have ideas about organizations or businesses, please pop them in our comments. I think it could be very helpful for folks moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think we would be remiss if we didn't mention the Community Care's website, communitycaretx.org, for individuals who are uninsured, who don't have access to a doctor and need to get tested. Please visit the communitycaretx.org website. We have at least 5 locations right now. We're relocating 2 additional sites.
Okay.
But another, and Ted could speak more to the specific messaging, but we're really encouraging individuals that if you have symptoms of COVID-19, you need to act like you have the virus, and you need to stay home and isolate yourself until you're able to get tested. We just don't want folks, kind of going about their business and celebrating 4th of July if they're sick, because we don't want them passing the virus on. Ted, did you want to add anything?
I was just going to say there is a hotline number, council member. It's the Community Cares COVID-19 hotline, which is 512-978-8775. That's 978-8775. You can call there and talk to an expert, and they can guide you through the process and where to go for a test. Community Care is really focused on testing people who don't have insurance or people who don't have doctors. If you have insurance or you have a doctor, we encourage you to call there first, because to be really frank, community care testing sites are overwhelmed and they just can't keep up with demand. So as Perla said, if you have symptoms, assume right now that you have COVID-19 and start acting and living that way, because by the time you get tested and get the results back, you may have passed that 10, 14-day mark. Now, if you have symptoms and they worsen and you need medical attention, call 911 or go to the ER. We're not saying to delay care, but if you have symptoms, a symptom or two, and it's not an urgent emergency, you should just begin to quarantine yourself, stay away from others. And the 3 W's, it's really, really easy. Wear a mask, wash your hands, watch your distance. It couldn't be easier. And this weekend, stay home and stay safe.
Well, so for either of you, I tried to jump in, but Ted, you were ready to go. No, it was great. That was all good information. You answered some of my questions, but I just want to get more clarity. And Perla, I can see that you type like lightning. So maybe you could throw in our private chat also I'd like for either one of you to say it. Where are the testing sites? What changes have been made? What changes can people anticipate? And more or less, I'd like to be able to say explicitly where locations are, what changes have been made, what should people anticipate is different moving forward.
Let me just jump in real quick about the testing sites, because as of now, there are 5 and things are changing, and they also change by day of the week. So I would just go to the Community Care website, Community Care TX, and I think it was on the screen just a minute ago, and you can find the testing site nearest you. Here are the changes. The testing location in Dove Springs, which is the William Cannon Community Care Health Center, and in Pflugerville, as of now, they are not doing drive-up testing, only walk-up testing for community care patients. We're in the process of relocating those drive-up testing sites. Here's a pretty sobering fact. They were designed to handle about 30 to 40 people a day walking up to get tested. They've been doing 50 tests an hour, and it's just not sustainable. The traffic flow has overwhelmed the locations, and there isn't enough staff currently. So Central Health is working with Community Care to find new locations. We believe we have one for Pflugerville. It just hasn't been approved yet. And so we don't want there to be any lapses, but there are 5 other locations that are available, including the Hancock site. But even there could be some more changes, future changes, as we look for locations that can better handle all the volume of traffic and the volume of people. Just back to the testing. Again, if you have insurance and you have a doctor, call there first, or maybe go to an urgent care. Community Care is really focused on testing people who are uninsured, who don't have a physician or an established doctor, or are community care patients. We want to make sure that people have no place to go, no place to turn, can get tested. So that's Community Care's focus. And again, a change as of today: if you do not have symptoms, Community Care isn't testing you. They're saving those tests for people who are symptomatic or have underlying health conditions. And that is the same policy as Austin Public Health.
Thanks for that clarification. So one other question that's been asked is, will there be any changes to drive-through testing sites in terms of hours of operation?
So the hours, another great question. The hours of operation changed, I believe, last week to 6:30 a.m. to 1:30 p.m. That was done for 2 main reasons. One, for people who may have to go to work or go somewhere during the day, they could get tested before. Also because of the heat. These are drive-up testing sites that are outdoors, and Community Care staff are in full personal protective equipment, or PPE. So you can just imagine when the temperature is 95 or 100 degrees and humidity is 80 or 100%, it's really stifling. And so community care has to make sure that the staff is safe. And so those hours shifted. Now, again, back to demand, what we've been seeing is oftentimes all the slots are full by the time the site opens. So like at Hancock, people have been getting there in the wee hours of the morning lined up just to get a test that day. And there are only so many tests that a site can provide in one day based on staff. And so when those slots are full, they actually count the cars. And when those slots are full, they can't do any more tests at that site for that day. So that's the situation that we're in and why there's been changes to the criteria, and there will be more changes to locations.
Well, so I think you might have just answered my second question. Or the next question rather. I was gonna ask, how can we expand capacity, both in terms of acquiring more test kits and expanding the number of testing sites? But it sounds to me like you're also saying what needs to happen in addition to that is capacity by way of people power. We need people doing the testing. And so I guess I won't ask you to answer all of those. Well, no, because they all, how can we build more capacity here? What do we need to do?
That's the goal for sure. And so Central Health today approved funding to help pay for the recruiting and hiring of staff for community care. So that's happening, but I think community care is, I don't want to speak for their HR team, but they're in a constant state of recruiting for these drive-up testing sites. And so that's happening. I'm sure there could be more. Perla might want
yes,
to on that.
Actually, I would encourage anybody who has, a healthcare background to go to the communitycaretx.org website and look at some of the open positions. We're hiring right now staff to assist with testing. And I think you have, ideally a medical assistant certification or more. But please, if there's anyone out there who is looking for an opportunity and has the, proper background, please look at the website. And I also wanted to add that, we're working closely again, with Austin Public Health, the city and county leaders on those contingency plans to, be prepared in the, the best way that we can. Ted mentioned that, community care was, is needing more staff. So Central Health, we kind of did this emergency appropriations. And, I also want to add that our budget process is starting up right now. And, we're very open to public feedback. And we have a survey on our website right now, open until June 27th at centralhealth.net. And we welcome feedback and, what more we can be doing. And, also, we're going to be having several, board meetings coming up talking about our budget. And before every board meeting, we have public communication similar to what City Council has. And we welcome the feedback and collaboration and partnerships.
I wanted to make one more note because you asked about testing capacity.
Yes.
It isn't about not having enough testing kits at this point. It's about having the staff and the space to provide those tests to meet demand. And on the back end, it's getting those tests processed. So I don't have the exact number, but it has fluctuated between earlier on 3 or 4 days to 14 days to get a test. And that's why the message of, if you have symptoms, just assume that you have COVID-19 and quarantine, because by the time you get in for a test, get those test results back, you may have passed that 10-day quarantine period.
Thank you. I appreciate that clarification. And it looks like we're a little bit over time. Are there any final thoughts, things that you just want to make certain people know? And other than, obviously the contact information, this is not the last time you'll be able to talk to community care and Central Health folks. And so, we've shown the websites. I encourage people, if you have additional questions, go to those websites. If you have input, definitely go and complete that survey and let your your voice be heard. But are there any final thoughts that either of you would like to leave our audience with?
I would just say stay home this weekend. You know, the parks are closed, bars are closed, restaurants are at limited capacity. It's a really smart time to stay home and be safe. And remember the 3 W's: wear a mask, wash your hands, and watch your distance.
And ditto. That was exactly what I was going to say too. Just, stay home and stay safe.
Well, thank you both. I really I couldn't appreciate you more for joining us. I suspect we'll have lots of questions. So again, if you're one of those late night people scroll on over to our Facebook page and see if there are any questions that were asked during the course of the broadcast that you might be able to answer quickly. So thank you again, both of you, for your time, for your insights, and for sharing them with folks who I know are eager to have accurate, factual data. Perla, Cavazos, Ted, Burton, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was a lot, y'all. And so I know it's sort of difficult to take in all that information at once. So I encourage you to go to the websites that we showed, call those phone numbers, and go to that website and submit your thoughts as it pertains to your experiences, your questions, what you think they could be doing differently. I'm certain that they welcome compliments and criticism. And so I just encourage you to keep the conversation going. I know that my office is working on, Ted mentioned the isolation facility, and a lot of folks don't know that exists, don't know that there's a place where you can go and safely quarantine and, not run the risk of getting an elder family member sick, not running the risk of spreading the virus to members of your family. So just if you have any questions, I'm going to say it again towards the end, but there's a website that has all the possible information you could need to make sure that you're as informed as possible. So we're running out of time on this week's edition of Talk with Tasha. I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. I also want to plead with you. Take every precaution you can to keep yourself, your family, and your community safe and healthy this holiday weekend and beyond. Many parks and pools are closed, and the annual fireworks show is canceled. No matter how old you are, please do not leave your house unless it's an absolutely essential trip. And if you do have to leave, please wear a mask. Maintain 6 feet of separation from people outside your household and avoid large crowds. Also, wash your hands. What Ted say, the 3 W's: wear a mask, wash your hands, watch your distance. If you're feeling symptoms, you might qualify for free testing from Austin Public Health. You can find out more information about that, as well as other really important resources at www.austintexas.gov/COVID-19. If you're feeling more severe symptoms, contact a healthcare provider immediately. I want to let you all know, Talk with Tasha will be taking a 1-week break, but I'll be back again on Wednesday, July 15th. And in the meantime, I hope everybody will stay safe, stay healthy, and where you're able, try to have some fun. Thanks for joining us.